Thank you. Now, could we have the Moa Neighbourhood group, Barry Brooker? Hi, welcome.
Hi, kia ora koutou, and many thanks for the opportunity. First to put in a brief submission and now a chance to speak to you as well. You'll be pleased to know my little presentation will also be brief. As you'd said, I'm Barry Brooker. I chair the Moa Neighbourhood group. I've done that for some time. I also currently chair the Peterborough Village Incorporated. So I'm coming from a perspective of someone who actually lives in the central city and someone who would like to continue to live there. I think one of the challenges for someone doing a presentation and living here is just so many issues to address, which is also the problem that you face. So I'd like to start with just a couple of general comments. And the first is, as a community and for me personally, just to acknowledge the difficult task the council has. In New Zealand's history, there wouldn't be many councillors who have had to deal with the aftermath of a disaster such as the Christchurch earthquakes. But unfortunately for you, your predecessors left the city underinsured, but I'm sure even if we'd been fully insured, it would be a really difficult job. And secondly, the earthquakes provided the government with an opportunity to enact emergency powers. And these were no doubt necessary at the time. But it appears that regaining the normal powers for the council and returning the democratic rights of the people of Christchurch is not quite such an easy task. For those of us looking on, we're unsure just how much control, just in some cases, the council has over what would have previously been their domain and a chance to make the decisions on their own. Which brings me to the point of asset sales. And again, even without the earthquakes, our current government's made it very clear that they wish to sell New Zealand's national assets, and they seem to think councils should do the same and sell their local assets. Once the city's assets are sold, however, we lose an important income stream and an important lever for controlling the rates. And I found that your recent breakfast workshop at Hackney Netball Centre, that was really worthwhile. It was great to be there with others and really good to hear the plans and the issues that you raised. But I was somewhat disappointed that in the main document, the only options in there were for asset sales. There wasn't something in there saying, well, if we keep our assets, this will be the outcome. But I believe there are in the supporting documents, but not in the main documents that went to the population. My own view, and that of many of the people in the Moa and Peterborough groups, is that asset sales should be a last resort. And we also believe that renegotiating the anchor projects with the government is essential. But I wouldn't like to be doing your job doing that. Seems like a difficult task. As someone living in the inner city, I'd also like to make a distinction which seems to sometimes be lacking, and that is that when plans are formulated, and often when we read in the newspaper, there's no distinction made between the central city as a community in its own right. So for us, this is our community, but at the same time, it's also trying to do the job of being a centre for Greater Christchurch and for Canterbury, in some cases for New Zealand. And for those of us living here, we see these as quite different things to achieve. And sometimes they counter each other as well. The other thing that is sometimes a little distressing is that media items and even some of your own council documents at times forget that there are many people living in the central city. And we've been there right through the earthquakes, we're still there now, and most of us are committed to residential life in the central city. And in terms of your goal of trying to get more people living in the central city, probably the easiest step is to keep us there rather than get others coming in, which is a harder one. And that leads me a wee bit, making a contrast and linking that to the anchor projects. The large and costly anchor projects do have a place, obviously, in revitalising Christchurch and the Canterbury economies, and probably New Zealand's economy. But I don't think they are projects that will actually attract people to live in the inner city, and they're definitely not always attractive to those of us who live there. These are expensive projects, together with attempts to force development into precincts, seems a far cry from the exciting mixed-use development with a focus on people, pedestrians and cycleways that were portrayed in the initial concepts with those initial discussions following the earthquakes. And I do understand that a lot has happened since, but we were full of these great hopes then, and perhaps some of the realities have hit home. In making the distinction between the local and the broader use, I think a good example would be something like the Centennial Pool. I'm not going to harp on about that, which is now gone, but the Centennial Pool played a really important part for those of us who lived in the community. It was a community asset, whereas a big pool in a new stadium is going to meet the needs of a different group of people. I'd like to also just comment briefly on building, making it easier as we see it anyway, making it easier for developers to build with limited concern for those who already live in the area and not having to have parking. For those of us who live there, just in terms of parking, I can see why we'd prefer not to have cars, but I don't see how they're just going to disappear. So the worry is we're going to have buildings without parking and the cars are still going to be here. But there's also, an insistence now on high density of housing, which definitely has a place in our city. We acknowledge the need for high density housing in the central city, but we also see a need for quality and variety. And we're not too sure that both those will happen under present plans. And one thing, 100% agreement with the council's direction, that is in the horizontal infrastructure. And we realise just how important this is, but also that it's very expensive. And that delays in this are going to cause more problems later and more expense at a later date. And then just on transport, it's an enormous issue that you're facing there. And I think particularly we are a relatively small city and we're a country dominated by cars. So really my comment is good luck on getting Christchurch residents to use public transport. It'd be great if you can, but I don't think it's going to be an easy sell. Cycleways, a lot of people in the inner city are very keen on these, but being realistic, they're not a panacea, but they should be part of any planning. I was also reading in the 10-year plan document, the long-term plan, and just quoting from it, we believe the earthquakes have provided us with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As our city and communities are rebuilt, we can build a safer, resilient, more sustainable and efficient transport system. And I think they rider to go with that. We can't do that if we keep rebuilding so many of our roads just as they were before. There is a need to repair some roads very quickly. You need traffic to flow and movement within the city. But rebuilding them actually exactly as they were prior to the earthquake, I think reduces the chance of having more cycle, pedestrian and bus-friendly routes in the future. What we do now, obviously the cost of that, these things are staying in place for a long time. And one local example for us is Salisbury Street, which initially had some exciting things going to happen there, and now it's just a busy one-way road. The next really is more of an aside, and that is we'd love to see, when it's feasible, the inner city electric buses back in place. They did add some vitality to the city and kept people moving around it. But we realise perhaps you need a critical number of businesses in place before you can do that. And my final comment is just on affordable and social housing. The current government wishes to divest itself of social housing stock, and I think some of the responsibility that goes with that. And it seems to think that the council should do likewise. From our view, the city, the quality of life in our city isn't measured by expensive homes and our new big and large stadiums. It has to be measured against how we house and care for the least fortunate in our city. And I hope Many of the group hope that the ideology of the current government is not forced on the council, and that we can continue to be a city that cares for its residents. There are many things I can say, but I'll finish it there. And just thank you so much for the chance to speak, but also for the incredible work you do on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There isn't time for questions, but I think you spoke to what a lot of people have been expressing as we've listened to these submissions. So thank you very much for taking the time, and please pass on our thanks to your group.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.